That medal never belonged to you." Those words weren't spoken with anger or bitterness. They fell like a weather report, calm, cold, and indisputable. I stood frozen before the old wooden table in the garage, where the dim light of an early autumn morning filtered through the half-closed iron door. In front of me was a sealed wooden box, its glass surface clouded with dust, yet the glint of bronze still shimmered inside. The Navy Commendation Medal lay centered on deep green velvet. Below it, a silver-engraved plaque, Jason Barrett, Petty Officer 2nd Class, Operation Starhold. I didn't move. Only my eyes blurred for a moment, not from emotion, but from shock. Starhold. The operation I led. The operation that nearly ended in a massacre if I hadn't taken command when headquarters lost signal and made the call to sacrifice 3 ships to save 2 stranded crews. I remember that day clearly. I was in the operations room. I was the last one holding the line when the signal jammed. I guided 3 teams through the fire zone. I pulled 24 people from the brink of death. Not Jason. Jason never left San Diego. My father quietly closed the box's lid, as if he were putting away something ordinary, inconsequential. Jason will be officially awarded the medal next Wednesday. A small, simple ceremony. You don't need to be there. It's not for you. I wanted to ask why, but I didn't. I was used to the silent role. Even now, when the obvious was distorted before my eyes, I couldn't say a word. If you've ever stood before someone you call father and heard him bluntly erase you from the family history like that, tell me how it felt. Share in the comments below if you've ever been ignored in the very story you helped build. My name is Rachel Barrett. Rank Commander Naval Intelligence, Joint Command Service 15 years. Combat Deployments 4. Special Mission 1, never documented. The last time I left a war zone was 10 months ago, and to this day, not a single news article mentions me. Not even my family. We were at my father's house, suburban South Denver. A 2-story home built in the 70s, brown shingles, wooden walls, peeling paint around the window frames. But the garage was always clean, tidy, organized to an unsettling degree. Everything had its place. Except me. I hadn't been back here in over 2 years. I hadn't planned to return until I got an email from my father's assistant saying he needed to meet privately. No details, no emotion. Just like how he taught me to write reports as a kid, short, precise, leave out the personal. And this was why I was called back to witness a medal being awarded to someone who didn't fight. Staged perfectly down to every detail as everything my father did. Jason does good work. He knows how to maintain an image. The public needs symbols like him. And you know. I gave a faint smile. Not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. Me, the one who spent 3 weeks in a desert with flickering satellite signals and a casualty list in hand, being told I couldn't maintain an image. I left the garage without a goodbye. My father didn't call after me. He didn't step out from the doorway. On my way to the car, I passed a government SUV parked nearby DoD plates, military intelligence insignia on the windshield. I was in my dress uniform. The commander insignia gleamed silver in the early sunlight, but no one in the house asked about it. Maybe in their eyes I was still just little Rachel riding her bike to school, alone, sitting at the end of the dinner table never chosen when guests came over. As a kid, I believed I'd be recognized if I did well enough. When I received my first internal commendation after a deployment in Bahrain, I took a picture and sent it to my father. No reply. When I was appointed as a strategist for the Gulf region, I called to tell him. The phone rang, then went to voicemail. But Jason A. letter inviting him to the Navy's media program was framed in the middle of the living room, like living proof of the Barrett legacy. Have you ever been seen as the wrong gender for the role your family expected? Leave a comment if you've been judged as not enough, just because you weren't what they imagined. I drove straight to the airport. I was supposed to take the day off as planned, but I no longer felt like resting. I needed to work, needed another operation, another goal. A battlefield where at least right and wrong were determined by actions, not names. As the plane took off, I pulled out my phone and reopened an email my father sent after Jason received the medal, "Recognition matters," when it serves something greater. Let it go. Something greater. Who was he talking about himself? or the legacy he was building with a borrowed medal I didn't know. And maybe I didn't want to know anymore. That was the moment I decided no one would rewrite my story again. Not because I needed to prove anything, but because if I stayed silent, I'd become part of that erasure. I'd lived too long in the shadows of the system, my family, and myself. But maybe I'd just seen the first sliver of light, an invitation from Washington, a conference that would change everything. Not because my name was called, but because this time I'd walk into that room as the one who truly led. Boys carry the family name. Girls just need to know their place. I heard that phrase for the first time at 8 years old when I climbed the wall to reach the flag hanging high in the backyard. Jason was 10, standing below, hands in his pockets, smirking smugly. And my father, arms crossed, standing near the garage, looked straight at me and said it as if reciting an inherited truth. I think I knew then in the Barrett family the roles had already been assigned. I grew up in a house where every praise was reserved for one person. Whatever Jason did, my father recounted 3 times at the dinner table at church, at the weekend barbecue with neighbors. Jason was chosen as soccer team captain. Jason got an A+ in history. Jason was invited to tour the military academy. And me, I taught myself camping. Read military history, aced math, and wrote strategic essays in 9th grade. My father only raised an eyebrow. Good job. But you know Jason got an A too, right? Have you ever felt like you're living in your own home, but as a side character in someone else's biography? If so, leave a few words in the comments. I'm not the only one I know that. My mother was the only one who saw me. Truly saw me. She wasn't loud. Unlike my father, who entered every room like he was the centerpiece of every operation, my mother was gentle, steadfast, and quietly blunt. One evening when I was 13, she sat beside me in my room as I cried because my gym teacher called me too stubborn. She didn't comfort me with words. She just placed her hand on my shoulder and said, "You don't need to be like them. Being you is enough." That was the first time I believed I didn't need permission to exist. But she passed when I was 16. Lung cancer. She didn't smoke. No one knew why. In her final months, Jason visited the hospital once because he had an interview for the Naval Academy program. My father didn't blame him. Instead, he said men don't weaken because of emotions. Men act. And me, the one who stayed by her side every day, changing bandages, reading books, holding her hand, was told, don't let emotions ruin your discipline. At the funeral, I looked at the family photo placed in front of her casket. Jason stood in the center, tall, radiant in his suit. I was at the edge of the frame with a forced smile and red-rimmed eyes. That photo was later framed and hung in my father's office. Not for me, but because Jason looked like the perfect heir. After my mother's death, my father started controlling everything. He called Jason a monument in the making. From clothing to behavior, every step Jason took was monitored, as if he were a presidential candidate. Jason didn't resist. In fact, he seemed to enjoy it. And me, I started to disappear. Not banned, not yelled at. Just ignored. No one asked what I needed. No one asked what I thought. Sometimes I felt like if I quietly left the house, they wouldn't even notice. I once overheard my father tell an old friend of my mother's at Christmas, Rachel, she's doing something in logistics. Reserves, I think. At the time, I'd just finished frontline training in Norfolk, top of my class. But in his eyes, it wasn't worth as much as a lunch invitation from Jason's commander at the San Diego Media Base. I joined the Navy not to stand out. I joined because I needed discipline. Needed a place where I didn't have to compete for a role. I thought I'd be judged by my actions, not my name. But my father was always one step ahead. Jason was placed in an internal media program. No deployments, no front lines, just drafting statements and handling press. Yet he wore the uniform posed beside the flag and got articles published as if he'd led a fleet through a war zone. And me, I was trained in signal decryption, drone operations, and blackout response. But when I sent updates home, no one opened them. When I called to report my transfer to Gulf Intelligence, voicemail played for 8 seconds, then cut off. When I was 18, I asked permission to cut my hair short for training convenience. My father said in front of Jason, "You trying to look like a real soldier. Look at you. No one's putting you on the cover of a military magazine." Jason laughed. I remember his look not quite mocking, but pitying. I didn't respond, but I cut my hair. Years later, when I received my first rank insignia, I took a photo of my nameplate and sent it with a single message. "Dad, I'm officially an officer now." No reply. A week later, I learned Jason had appeared on local TV as the Navy's strategic spokesperson. I stopped sending messages that day. I don't hate Jason. I never did. He was born into the role of the heir. He just did what was programmed. And if you grow up in a system that believes someone else's existence overshadows you, you'll grab any chance to hold on to the light. But I hate that system. I hate how it turns truth into decoration and pushes those who do the real work into the shadows. Not because they're not good enough, but because they don't fit the legacy mold. If you've ever been written out of a story because of your gender appearance or silence, I want you to leave a period in the comments. No explanation needed. Just know you're not alone. I remember the one time my father called me good. It was when he needed me to write a speech for Jason before a certification ceremony. I stayed up until 3 a.m. to finish it. The speech was praised by the media as profound, bold, and inspiring. Jason didn't mention my name, neither did my father. But that day, as I passed his office, he nodded and said, "You write well. Shame no one wants to hear it from someone like you." I learned early on. In some families, recognition isn't for the doer, but for the one playing the role. Jason was the image. I was the backstage. But looking back now, I see something else because I'd been in the shadows so long, I could see where the real light was. If no one sees you make yourself unforgettable through action. I signed my enlistment papers on a June afternoon when Denver held its breath in the early summer heat. The empty recruiting office hummed with the drone of an old air conditioner. I remember the feel of the pen's ink spreading on the paper, a thin, precise, decisive stroke. I didn't tell my father. Didn't text Jason. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because I knew they wouldn't care. I joined the Navy not to prove anything to them, but to keep from disappearing. Basic training was a shock, not physically, but in the gap between the real and the image I'd seen in Jason's photos. At the barracks in northern Illinois, among hundreds of recruits in helmets lined up under the sun, I realized here everyone starts at zero. No chosen one. No someone's kid. Just skills, reflexes, and endurance. I was woken at 400, ran 8 kilometers, before breakfast learned survival techniques, topography, tactical codes. Nights of marching in freezing sand and rain, crawling under barbed wire while instructors shouted over simulated gunfire. I wasn't the fastest, not the strongest, but I was relentless. I never skipped a drill, never asked for a break, never complained. You know what kept me going, not ambition, but the familiar silence. Silence like when I won a scholarship and my father only said, Silence like when I topped my class and no one asked how I felt. And now in the barracks I realized if I was used to no one seeing me, I was also used to no one stopping me from moving forward. Have you ever used being overlooked as fuel to keep going? If you have, leave a few words in the comments. Silence can be scarier than feeling invisible, but sometimes it's what keeps you from being extinguished. When assigned a specialty, I chose intelligence and strategic logistics, partly because I was good at analysis, partly because I wanted to try something Jason hadn't touched. I was sent to Bahrain, a joint forward command base. Hot, harsh, and not for anyone expecting glamour. We lived in field barracks 40 kilometers from the nearest civilian area. Every morning I woke at 0430, checked maps, satellite signals, convoy schedules, coordinated recon drones. Evenings could stretch to 0300 the next day if a mission came up. I didn't take photos, didn't post online, and no one sent good luck wishes. But during my first deployment I learned that trust without fanfare is the real kind of power. It was a nighttime mission delivering medical supplies to a forward outpost under ambush risk. The GPS was jammed. The lead technician was injured. I was the only one who had the entire route map memorized. I stepped into the truck's cabin, drove for 5 hours through the desert, and led the convoy to safety. No one filmed it, no medal. But the next day the coordinating lieutenant just nodded and said, "You know what to do when everything goes to hell. I'll remember that." I started getting unofficial missions when commanders needed someone to work through the night without complaint. Situations where a mistake meant lives. But my name never appeared in internal newsletters. And that was okay. Because I knew every time someone looked at me and said, Where were you all these months? It was a sign I'd done my job too well without needing a stage. I once thought if I did well enough long enough one day, I'd step into the light. Not because I needed applause, but because I wanted to exist as a real part of the shared story. I was wrong. Once, after completing an analysis chain that stopped a cyber attack on our radar system, I was nominated internally for a regional commendation. I saw my name on the preliminary list. Then, weeks later, the final list was published. My name was gone. I asked my direct superior. He went quiet, then said softly, "Not everyone's ready for the public, but we know what you did." That phrase stuck in my head for a long time. Not everyone's ready for the public. What did he mean? That I didn't photograph well? That I didn't look like the officer they wanted as a poster child? Or that I was a woman? What about you? Have you ever done the right thing and been pushed back just because you didn't fit the image someone wanted to keep? If so, you're not alone. Your comment could be a message for someone else feeling the same. I once wrote a letter to my mother, though she'd been gone for years. I wrote, "Mom, I'm here in the desert wearing my rank, keeping the system breathing. And no one says my name, but I keep going. Because I think you'd understand." I folded the letter, tucked it in my pocket, and carried it for a year. I didn't need anyone to see me to know I was there. But a part of me still hoped. One day someone would say, "We know who kept the system from collapsing." A year later, I was reassigned to the regional command post. My direct superior, Lieutenant Colonel Herrera, called me into his office. He slid a file toward me, pointing to a line backup command reroute, Operation Starhold. I looked at the map, an international convoy off Yemen's coast. He nodded. "If something goes wrong, you're the replacement." I didn't ask why. I just nodded. As I left the room, I knew I was no longer the soldier in the shadows. I was Plan B, in a world where Plan B is the only thing that saves lives. Real commanders don't wait to be appointed. They step up when everyone else steps back. I remember the exact sound when the comms went dead. Not an explosion, not an alarm, just a dry click in my headset, then total silence. The comms screen turned gray. A red message flashed in the center: "Comms lost. Unverified threat. Proceed with contingency." I looked up, scanning the auxiliary command room in Bahrain. For a split second, the room froze. The primary coordinator, Lieutenant Ramos, yanked off his headset, his face pale. "We just lost all signals from Shadowfall and Lancer 1. 2 ships. 42 people." Off Yemen's coast, in a newly sparked conflict zone, a region we weren't officially allowed to acknowledge being in. I wasn't formally assigned to Operation Starhold. I was just assisting with analysis. I was supposed to be on a flight home that day. My bags were already packed. My e-ticket was still in my inbox, but no one else in the room knew the ship layouts, supply routes, or backup escape paths like I did. And when Ramos looked at me, his lips tight, I knew exactly what was coming. "Rachel, I'm on it." In under 3 minutes, I took over the coordination board. The signal was heavily jammed. The main satellite link was down. I had to use a backup channel, an outdated line labeled unstable, but it was the only thing still working. The digital map lagged. I pulled out a paper backup map. Some of the younger guys looked at me like I was a living fossil. I marked coordinates with a red pen, traced safe corridors, and mentally charted a new withdrawal route. A comms tech next to me was trembling. "Ma'am, if we misdirect them, they'll end up in the kill zone. That's why we don't get it wrong." Have you ever been in a situation where every decision you made, every arrow you drew on a map, meant someone lived or died? If you've been there or had to make a big call with no one backing you, share it. You know the feeling. I know. Shadowfall lost steering due to equipment failure. Lancer 1 had its auxiliary engine damaged by shrapnel. 2 sailors were injured, 1 bleeding heavily. No medical team, no air support, and no time. I coordinated a backup supply drone originally scheduled for another mission. I manually redirected it, every coordinate, every signal entered by hand in 4 minutes. I guided a Lancer 1 technician to bandage a wound with an emergency kit and duct tape, all through a crackling radio. I had to repeat every instruction 3 times, and still kept my voice calm. They listened, and followed. Sometimes what keeps a system from collapsing isn't perfect command. It's a voice that doesn't waver when everyone else is screaming inside. Have you ever been the one to stay calm for others when inside you wanted to collapse? If so, you know courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting while trembling. After 2 hours of coordination, the ships began a safe reroute. A civilian convoy accidentally caught in the crossfire was also ordered to evacuate. 24 civilians, 42 servicemen. One ship heavily damaged, one nearly out of power. But no casualties. No one died. No one was left behind. Operation Starhold closed at 0300 local time. I set down my headset, walked out of the auxiliary command room, and stepped into the gray concrete hallway of the base. The night wind from the Gulf hit my face, icy laced with oil and sea salt. But my heart burned. I didn't think of Jason, didn't think of my father, didn't think of some news article. I only thought of the voices in my headset, every copy they responded with, every breath I had to keep steady, so no one knew I was terrified. The next morning I was called to the command office. Captain Seth Calloway, head of the operations division known for his harshness, stepped forward and placed a hand on my shoulder. Commander Barrett, "Sir, I saw how you handled it. No one else could have done it that fast, that clean. I just did my job, sir. No, you kept 66 people alive, and I'll make sure Washington knows it." He turned away. I didn't smile. I just nodded. And inside I told myself, don't expect. Just keep going. Wait and see. Because I'd lived long enough in a world where promises, even sincere ones, could be swallowed by more powerful hands that preferred pinning medals on those who fit the image. But for a moment, I believed this time might be different, that this time my name wouldn't be replaced. I carefully wrote the operation report, submitted it to the system. I kept a copy stored with other notes I'd never shown anyone. Pieces of truth in case I was ever asked to stay silent for the greater good. I didn't know that 3 months later, when I opened an email from an old colleague, I'd see a photo of Jason shaking hands with an admiral captioned Jason Barrett, recognized for contributions to Operation Starhold, coordinating communications and tactics from the rear. I stared at the screen until my eyes stung. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt empty. I forwarded the article link to my father. No note. 2 hours later, he replied, "Recognition matters most when it serves something greater. Let it go. You'll get a call from Washington." I held on to that promise like a talisman for nearly 30 days. Not because I needed praise, but because for the first time in my career, I believed what I did wouldn't be swallowed by the shadows. But then, time passed. No email, no call, no signal. I told myself it's probably being processed. Operations like that were often classified. Delays procedurally weren't unusual. Week 2, I started to doubt. Week 3, I checked my spam folder. Then the internal inbox. Then scolded myself for expecting. By week 4, I got a message. A single link. No introduction. From Lauren Chang, old friend from the academy, now at the Pentagon's Strategic Analysis Office. I clicked the link. The screen lit up with an outdoor ceremony, the national and Navy flags fluttering lightly in the background. Jason Barrett, in crisp white dress uniform, shaking hands with Rear Admiral Patrick Keane. The caption, "For outstanding contributions to Operation Starhold communications coordination and tactical support. The Navy Commendation Medal is awarded to Lieutenant Jason Barrett, San Diego Base." I thought I'd misread it, but I hadn't. The medal was given to my brother. For someone who never left the mainland, never heard Lancer One's cries for help, never manually flew a drone in blackout conditions, never touched the sweat and blood-stained paper map I used to save 66 lives, the room went suddenly quiet. Though I knew no one else noticed. It was still my DC office wooden desk, white walls. But the world seemed to stop. I didn't cry, didn't rage. I just went cold. I reopened the email, forwarded the link to my father. No words, just a simple click. I wanted to see what he'd say this time. 2 hours later, he replied, "The name matters for the legacy. Don't make a mess over one emotion." One emotion I'd stayed up 2 nights coordinating the operation, stopped a soldier's bleeding over the radio, sent a drone into a no-fly zone, marked safe corridors myself, and it was all one emotion. Have you ever had something you bled, sweated, and spent years to earn, only to see it handed to someone else because they were better suited for the image? If you have, share it, or leave A in the comments. You're not alone. I knew Jason didn't do it alone. No one gets a medal for contributions without verification. Someone rewrote the report. Someone changed the name in the system. Someone stamped the final approval. I'd seen it in the military. Not often, but enough to know. In a system built on image, truth is often just decoration, not the foundation. I printed the article, folded it, and tucked it into my pocket. Like I did with the Starhold report copy. Like the truths I knew were real but couldn't prove under microphones and spotlights. I didn't tell my team, didn't mention it to my superiors. I just kept working. Analyzed satellite signals, attended coordination meetings, took the next assignment, redeployed. I was so quiet, I almost believed I was fine. Weeks later, I stumbled across Jason's social media post. A photo from the medal ceremony. Caption honor as doing your part, whether on the front lines or behind the scenes. The comments below overflowed with praise. Proud of you. Jason, the Barrett family is a true military tradition, a future leadership model. I studied the photo. Jason smiled unguarded, confident, just as my father said he's suited for the public. I once thought if I stayed quiet long enough, the truth would surface on its own. But what I didn't account for was, if no one knows something's buried, no one will dig it up. Have you ever wondered if you were wrong for not speaking up? Felt like the only one remembering the truth, while the world applauded a lie, leave a line. Or just type I still remember. I didn't blame Jason. At least not then. Maybe he didn't know the full story. Maybe he was just called in, handed the medal, signed some papers. Maybe in his eyes, his contribution was real, even if it was from a media office. But what I couldn't forgive was his silence afterward. Not a single text, not a thank you, not an acknowledgement. 3 weeks later, I was back in D.C. On my desk was an envelope marked internal information. I opened it, just a new personnel assignment sheet, nothing unusual. But I saw Jason's name at the bottom, next to a new role, Strategic Communications Advisor, Mid-Level Officer Training Program. I sighed, folded the document. Because I understood now, no one rewards accuracy. They reward digestibility. That night I opened my laptop and wrote an unofficial report. Just to keep it, I listed every action I took in Starhold. Noted the times, contacts, drone codes, medical tape, even the radio frequency I used. Not to send, but to not forget. I printed it along with the photo of Jason receiving the medal, filed them together. I titled it, Truth. Doesn't need an audience, just needs to be kept. I knew no one might ever open that file. I might always be the one who did right in silence. But if I didn't keep that truth, who would? Some wounds don't bleed, but they make you retreat from your own life. I never filed a complaint. Didn't call headquarters. Didn't submit an anomaly report. Didn't contact the press. Didn't hold an internal meeting. I looked at the photo of Jason receiving the medal I deserved. Read my father's cold message, then folded it all into a private file locked in a drawer. And the next morning, I put on my uniform, tied my hair neatly, and stepped into the next mission as if nothing had been taken. The first operation after Starhold brought me back to the Middle East, near a zone marked gray on the strategic map. We called them zones that officially didn't exist, where every presence was covert, every mistake was self-accountable. I worked as a terrain analysis advisor, coordinating comms between 3 international branches while managing a crisis response team. My name didn't appear in media reports. Of course not. I stopped thinking about it. No one asked, "Are you okay?" after Starhold? No one said, "I heard you were the one coordinating." No one mentioned it. And slowly, even I learned not to expect them to remember. Have you ever been in a room full of people and still felt completely invisible? Not because they hated you, but because you weren't in the story they were telling. If you've felt that, leave a period in the comments. Sometimes a silent dot is enough to show you were there. The second operation was in winter, where temperatures dropped below 5 degrees Celsius and the wind carried sea salt dust. I led an emergency response team when a convoy was reported under attack. The GPS was cut off. We had to trace low-frequency signals to locate the missing vehicles. I found them. 3 vehicles, 8 survivors, 4 injured, 1 didn't make it. I sat in the back of a medical truck holding the hand of a private, bleeding from the chest, whispering, "It'd be okay, though. I didn't know if it would." He looked at me, lips trembling in the cold. "Are you the commander?" Just the one left in the room. Like Starhold, I froze. He knew. I didn't ask who told him. I just nodded and held his hand tighter. For the first time in months, I felt not quite recognized, but known. Not with fanfare, not with a medal, just someone remembering I did it. And I was still doing it. After that operation, I was sent back to DC temporarily. My superiors called it strategic redeployment. I called it returning to white walls with no memory. I tried dating. His name was Troy. A logistics officer, polite, gentle, asked about my deployments. He smiled often and always pulled out my chair at restaurants. At our third meeting, he asked, "Does your family worry with you always gone like this?" I smiled. They don't notice when I'm gone. He didn't ask more after that, and he didn't call again. Have you ever tried opening up only to realize the void in you was too big for someone else to fill? Ever smiled and said, "I'm fine," when inside was just silence? Share. If you've held a story so long it became a shield, no longer pain, but a foundation. The third operation, my last deployment that year, was on the northeastern African border. I was part of a team relaying info for a relief network. Nothing grand, not extremely dangerous, but it still demanded absolute precision. I handled 62 supply requests in 14 days. No errors, no lost shipments, and still no one mentioned my name. In the final report, I saw a line Regional Support Advisor R. Barrett. No rank, no title, nothing to connect it to the person who ran Starhold. I folded the report, tucked it into my bag, sighed. The last time I spoke to my father was a short call about tax information. He asked, still doing logistics. I went silent, then nodded, though he couldn't see. Daughters should do something stable. No need to be too intense. And that was the end of the call. I once thought if I stayed quiet long enough, didn't trouble anyone, didn't disrupt the order, they'd give me a seat. Not the front row, just a chair in the room. But I learned, when you become easy to overlook, people stop hesitating to overlook you. After the third operation, I returned to DC, this time to prepare for a senior advisory role. I was invited to a closed meeting on regional defense policy. A few senior officers and civilian officials were present. No one mentioned Starhold. No one asked about it. Jason's name was on the media advisory list for the next event. Of course, I looked through the Pentagon's glass window, my reflection faint against the soft yellow lights, and I thought I'm the background. But I'm still here. An invitation isn't always an honor. Sometimes it's a test. I'd gone through 3 operations in a year. 3 different lands 3 times, playing a supporting role in stories others told. And then, back in my DC office, a small room on the 4th floor of the interagency admin wing, where everything was gray from the carpet to the thoughts in my head. That afternoon, as I read a signal analysis from the Persian Gulf, a thin envelope slid under the door. No official seal, no red stamp, no sender. Just a plain white envelope, thick paper, sealed shut like words not yet permitted to be spoken. I almost tossed it into the unread paperwork pile, but something about its weight made me pause. It was heavier than routine admin documents, heavy like something out of place. I tore it open. Inside was a thick ivory card. Dark blue, border formal, but not ostentatious. The text was printed in classic serif font, sharp black ink, for outstanding contributions to joint strategic operations. Commander Rachel Barrett is invited to the 27th Strategic Defense Recognition SDR Conference. No fine print, no fake insignia, no alternate label. Just one name, my real name. No one else's. I sat still for a long time. Read it again, then a third time. The SDR conference wasn't a casual gala. It was where 4-star generals, senior civilian advisors, and those shaping defense policy sat around quiet roundtables to discuss strategy, power, and image. I knew this, because Jason had once called it an unofficial stepping stone to general rank. I opened my laptop, accessed the internal guest list, entered my code, scrolled to the speakers section, and there, third name on the main list, Lieutenant Jason Barrett, speaking at the session New Leadership in the Modern Military. I leaned back in my chair, breathing slowly. I shouldn't have been surprised, but it still hit me. Not just that Jason would be there, but that he was being honored. Again. At the place I'd just been invited to. Maybe you've been in a similar spot, finally called by name, but at the same table as someone who took what was yours. What would you do, step back quietly, or hold your seat share, if you've ever felt like an uninvited guest in a room with your name on the door? I stood, walked to the cabinet, pulled out the duffel with my dress uniform untouched for half a year. I hadn't worn it since Lieutenant Briggs's funeral the teammate lost during a 30-hour shift in Bahrain. No one in my family asked about him, just as no one asked why I came home early that day. I touched the silver shoulder boards, the commander insignia, then laid the uniform on the chair, looking at it like it belonged to someone else. I sat down and wondered, why did they invite me? Did someone make a mistake? Or do they need me there to fill a formal gap? And right after, a part of me whispered, no. They called the right name, and this time, no one wrote my report. No one took my role. I remembered the sleepless nights in war zones, the maps covered in sweat and dust, the messages I never got back. And then I understood. I don't need recognition, but I won't let my name be erased again. That night I wrote a single line in my notebook, I'll go, not for applause, but to never be silenced again. The next morning I sent my RSVP. No heads up to anyone, no notes. I didn't need to clarify to anyone that I deserved it. My presence was proof enough. Have you ever walked into a room you were once barred from and felt finally no one could erase you from the frame? Tell me if you've had that moment. Or just leave to let me know you stood up in your own way. On the day of the conference, I walked into the prep room with the invitation tucked neatly in my pocket. No entourage, no reporters, no flags. Just me in a crisp uniform, walking in shoes that bore the marks of mud and scorched metal. There's a unique feeling stepping into a room where the world has been prearranged except for you. The Willard Hotel's grand hall glowed under crystal chandeliers. The sound of dress shoes clicked lightly on marble floors. The air carried the scent of high-end cologne, strong coffee, and politics. I paused at the threshold, quietly adjusting my uniform's shoulder boards. Like a small ritual before crossing the line between shadow and light. I saw my father before he saw me. He was shaking hands with a former senator and a retired admiral. His smile measured his shirt collar so crisp it could slice the air. When our eyes met, his smile faltered for a split second. But that was enough. He left the group and walked toward me, his steps heavy, as if the gravity in this part of the hall was denser. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly, no greeting. "I was invited," I replied calmly. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Don't turn a personal matter into a public stain. You were taught about honor." I looked into his eyes. I never forgot. This time, I'm not using it to cover up. His gaze hardened. "You don't belong on this stage. Stay in your place behind the scenes where you've always been. Useful. Then you'd better hope the spotlight doesn't find me," I said and walked away. The conference hall was packed. Rows of seats stretched to the emergency exits. Familiar and unfamiliar faces turned toward the stage where 3 chairs were set. Jason was already in one, his face as perfect as a military magazine cover. I chose a seat mid-hall, not too close, not too far. Close enough to see every crease in Jason's dress uniform, discreet enough that no one would call my name, if things went as they planned. The lights dimmed. The anthem played. Then a female voice rose from the podium, clear, steady, Admiral Kessler's. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "we are here today to honor leadership not just on the battlefield, but in the quiet moments in the dark where orders aren't always given and courage must be self-defined." I sat up straighter. She continued. "Before we begin the main discussion, I request a correction. An oversight, truly, and a matter of honor." My breath grew heavier. In Operation Starhold, recognized a year ago, the announced recipient was Lieutenant Jason Barrett. However, after reviewing the actual operational records, we confirmed the commander of that operation was Commander Rachel Barrett. The room froze. She wasn't in the initial report. Kessler paused, then went on. But she was there, making decisions, saving the entire unit. And she deserves to be remembered. The spotlight shifted slightly. It found me. "Commander Barrett, please join us on stage." I stood unhurried, head unbowed. Each step on the soft carpet pulsed in my chest. I heard someone softly say my name. surprise, shock, then silence. Jason remained seated as I stepped onto the stage. His eyes didn't blink. His collar looked like it was choking him. I approached Kessler, shook her hand. She whispered, "Just for me. Sorry for the delay." I nodded. Kessler turned to Jason Lieutenant Barrett. "You'll continue your presentation as communications support for the operation. Your report, though not field-based, has reference value." Jason nodded a nod without muscle. He stood moved to the outermost chair. Our eyes met only once, and in that moment I saw no anger, just emptiness. We didn't need a dramatic confrontation. No need for a showdown. I just needed to be there in the light. I just needed the truth to be named correctly. The discussion proceeded in an odd atmosphere, formal yet cautious. But I felt something different. Not applause, but eyes. A silence that had shifted from doubt to listening. When the session ended, I stepped off the stage. No one rushed to shake my hand. No press waited. But a young female officer approached quietly, placed a hand on my shoulder. "Thank you," she said, then walked away. At the back of the hall, my father stood still. He didn't approach, didn't leave. His eyes followed every handshake I received. No anger, no remorse. Just, he no longer controlled the story. I didn't walk toward him. He didn't speak. And maybe, for the first time in my life, that silence was mine. Some apologies are never spoken aloud. But sometimes the right silence speaks louder than any voice. 3 months passed since the conference at the Willard, since my name was called before hundreds, since the spotlight shone on me not for applause, but to return a place stolen from me. I still worked in my small DC office. The room wasn't large, but quiet enough to hear coffee dripping in the morning, bright enough that I didn't need to turn on the light for 5 a.m. reports. I didn't expect anything after the conference. Didn't expect Jason to call. Didn't expect my father to change. Didn't imagine public recognition would erase the years I was ignored. I just wanted to keep going, work, live, without straining to prove myself anymore. But then, one ordinary Monday morning, while checking internal mail, I saw an envelope addressed to me. No bold print, no logo, just simple handwriting, Commander Rachel Barrett. Personal. My heart slowed by a beat. I carefully opened it. Inside was a copy of a letter attached to a memo from the Navy's Medal Coordination Office. I looked at the header request to decline medal and confirm Operation Commander, from Lieutenant Jason Barrett. I blinked, twice, then a third time. In the letter, handwritten in black ink, straightforward, no excuses. Jason stated clearly he was not the commander of Operation Starhold. He only supported the communications front in San Diego. He acknowledged the award was a system error and he hadn't stopped it. The one who led the operation, who took responsibility when no one else would, was my sister, Commander Rachel Barrett. I returned the medal. I don't deserve it. No stamped signature. No line saying I'm sorry. Just an acknowledgement. And a heavy silence after it. I sat motionless before that paper for nearly an hour. No surge of emotion. No tears. Just an unfamiliar calm, as if time was slowly pushing a boulder off my chest. No one reported this letter in military bulletins. No press release. No social media buzz. And I knew Jason made sure no one knew. It wasn't a correction for forgiveness. It was the only action he knew to take quietly, without expecting acceptance. I pulled a small wooden frame from my drawer, one I'd used for a photo of my mother, but never hung. I cut the letter's copy to fit. No decoration, no notes. Then placed it on my desk between my pen and the white ceramic mug I always used. The letter sat there like a testament, not of victory, but of truth spoken. Once, finally, and enough. I didn't call Jason, didn't email, didn't text, I read it. Because I understood, as I had for years, that my brother wasn't good with words, but this time he chose to be silent the right way. What do you think of apologies left unsaid? Have you ever forgiven someone just because they stayed silent correctly? Sometimes we don't need to hear sorry. Just need them to stop, acknowledge, and not keep being wrong. If you've been there, I want to hear your story. Share it. Your story might be the wake-up call someone needs. Since that day, I worked every day as usual. But something changed, not in others' eyes, but in my heartbeat. I started to feel I wasn't a shadow anymore. Not because I was celebrated, but because even the one who took the light let go of it. And strangely, that feeling wasn't victory. It was peace. Once a young lieutenant in my unit, Thomas saw the letter on my desk and asked, "Ma'am, are you going to hang it up?" I shook my head. "No, I just keep it there. To remember. Remember what he asked, curious." I smiled faintly. That sometimes fixing a wrong doesn't need words. Just the right person doing it at the right time. Some conversations need no words. And sometimes those silent dialogues are the truest ones in life. It was a quiet Saturday morning. I arrived earlier than usual, sitting in my small office looking through the frosted glass window. The early autumn light crept over the trees like someone's hand caressing time. My coffee mug was still warm when my internal inbox pinged softly. I opened it. A message from Anna, an old teammate from Bahrain. Short, "You might want to see this." Attached was a photo. No caption. I clicked it open. My heart slowed. In the photo, my father, Thomas Barrett, stood alone by a gravestone. No one around. He wore an old, slightly wrinkled uniform, still creased sharply. In his hand was a small bouquet of white daisies, mixed with purple lavender. He placed the flowers on the ground, head bowed. No flag. No photographer. No speech. The gravestone read, "Lieutenant Daniel Briggs, 1987, 2023. He served with courage. He was never forgotten." I didn't realize I was holding my breath until a car outside snapped me back to reality. Daniel, my friend teammate, the quiet soldier who drove with me through Yemen's night, once called forgettable by senior peers because he spoke little. A gentle smile and silent loyalty. He died after a 30-hour shift, fell asleep at the wheel. I'd worn my dress uniform to his funeral. No one in my family came. No one asked. Yet now, my father was there. I didn't call him. Didn't text. Didn't ask why. But I knew no one stumbles upon Daniel's grave. No father puts on a uniform, prepares flowers, finds the exact place, the exact moment, by accident. He'd gone to the place I'd been, where I'd lost someone. Not to explain, not to admit fault, but simply to stand there. And standing there sometimes is the kindest thing a once proud man can do. I printed the photo, placed it in a thin wooden frame, set it beside Jason's letter. Not to boast, not to forgive, just to mark the moment when the two men in my life who never agreed with me, never defended me, chose a quiet way to hear the truth. Have you ever seen someone apologize without a word? A look, an action, a presence at the right place. Right time. If you have, you'll understand some apologies aren't in vocabulary, but they're vivid in the air. Share with me. I believe we've all had a moment like that, understood only by our own hearts. A few days later, I visited the military cemetery. The sky was crystal blue, the sun gentle, the breeze carrying the scent of freshly cut grass. I found Daniel's grave. The flowers were still fresh, clearly replaced recently. Beside them was a small folded note tucked into the stone flower holder. I carefully opened it. No signature, just a few short handwritten lines. I didn't see enough, didn't hear enough. But I believe if you chose to follow her, she was worthy. Sorry for not knowing sooner. I recognized my father's handwriting instantly, still slightly slanted to the right, neat and disciplined. I didn't take the note. I folded it, tucked it back, and placed a small pebble on top to keep the wind from taking it. I didn't need him to explain to me. He'd spoken to the only person I'd lost, the one who saw me as a commander, no conditions attached. On the way back, I passed the old house. The Denver wooden home was the same white-painted porch, deep green door maple trees in the yard turning golden. I didn't stop the car. I just slowed down, then sped up. Not because I didn't forgive, but because I understood some roads don't need to be revisited, just known, that I'm no longer walking alone. I once thought if I were recognized, called by name, stood in the spotlight, I'd feel free. But that feeling didn't come with applause. It came when you walked into a quiet room, closed the door behind you, and knew you no longer needed permission to exist. Colorado Springs greeted me with a sky so vast and air so crisp, it stilled the soul. The mountains in the distance stood like a silent promise. Here, things don't need to be loud to carry weight. I arrived at the Joint Base in a new role, Senior Strategic Advisor, Multilateral Operations Coordination Division. The title wasn't flashy. The office wasn't large. But from the young team's glances to the briefing meetings, I realized one thing here. I wasn't misnamed. I didn't need to reassure anyone of my existence. The first morning I arrived early. The office's glass window faced east, so the sunrise just grazed my desk as I set down a box. That box, still black leather velvet lined, was in a parcel sent from D.C. Inside was the Navy Commendation Medal engraved with Jason's name. But what made me keep it wasn't the medal. It was the small note tucked under the velvet. Now you don't have to prove anymore. No signature. No more words. But I knew the handwriting. I'd wanted to scream written letters, then torn them up, imagined cold retorts to counter everything. But holding that medal, I only felt calm. Not forgiveness, but closure. I placed the box on a shelf eye level right below a photo of my Bahrain team. Not an official shot, just a moment of us eating crackers on a truck bed after a shift. Daniel still had his half smile. Alyssa was frowning at the heat. And me, holding a water bottle, looking far off, an expression I now understand was someone trying not to disappear. Next to the box was the frame with Jason's medal declination letter. I didn't display it to show off, didn't mention it in early meetings. But when a young officer visited my office and glanced at the opening lines, he asked, "You're keeping it?" I nodded. Yeah, to remind me that not everyone knows how to start over, but everyone gets a chance to try. I know some won't understand why I didn't toss the medal or return it or hold a proper announcement. But real recognition doesn't come from the medal landing in the right hands. It comes from knowing you don't need it to know you're worthy. I'd lived as a shadow in my family's story, in the military, in my own thoughts. Every step measured, was I trying too hard? Too much, too silent, too present? But here, amid peaceful mountains and walls covered in tactical maps, I no longer needed to measure. Once during a humanitarian support strategy meeting, a general asked me, "What do you think about sending female officers to lead in high-risk zones?" I looked him in the eye and said, "If they're capable, gender doesn't increase or decrease the risk. But not sending them just because people aren't used to seeing women lead, that's the real strategic risk." The room went quiet for a few seconds, then he nodded. No one spoke further, and they didn't need to. Because when you don't have to prove your right to speak, your words carry real weight. Have you ever felt that when you walked into a space and realized you didn't have to shrink to fit it? Tell me, your story might be the light guiding someone else trying not to vanish. That evening I went home earlier than usual, sat on the porch watching the mountain's shadows stretch as the sun set. I opened my phone, almost called my father, but I stopped. I didn't need that call to know he'd traveled farther than I thought. And if my quiet presence in the home he built went unacknowledged, his quiet presence at that cemetery was an acknowledgement I was grown enough to understand. I texted Jason a short line, "Put the medal back where it belongs. Thanks for this time choosing to step back." He didn't reply. But 3 days later, I received a small package. No sender's name, my lost tactical notebook from Bahrain, misplaced after the last operation. A note was tucked in the front page. I kept it knowing one day you'd need to remember you were never invisible. I smiled for the first time in years, without a trace of bitterness. There's a simple question I once couldn't answer without hesitating. What do you do in the military? I used to dodge it, said vague things: I support strategy, I work in logistics. But now, when asked, I smile and say I lead. No explanation, no waiting for approval, just a simple truth and enough. A year has passed since I placed Jason's medal box on the shelf. Things are different now. I no longer feel like I'm walking into rooms as an uninvited guest. I built and run a new program right to be named, an internal initiative ensuring young officers aren't forgotten in reports records or misattributed honors. We work quietly but systematically, a volunteer team from various units, many with stories like mine. We review operation reports, contact frontline personnel, gather field commander testimonies, and ensure that if someone led, sacrificed, or contributed, their name isn't replaced by someone easier to hear or print. Not everyone likes the program. Some find it bothersome. Some say it's old news, why bring it up? But a young lieutenant from Guam cried in my office when she saw her name correctly listed in last month's internal bulletin. She said, "For the first time, my mom saw my name in the news, not mixed up with someone else." One moment like that, and I know why I'm still here. That morning I walked into the office before the sun rose. Colorado Springs are peaceful. Birds chirp softly, the air cold enough to remind you you're alive. On my desk was an unsigned report. Beside it, the familiar shelf. The metal box was still there, black, glossy, silent. Jason's letter behind it in a simple wooden frame. And one more thing, centered a yellowed sheet of paper. My mother's handwriting once written on the inside cover of a notebook I carried. You don't have to prove your worth, you just need to remember truth, if kept, will carry its own weight. I read each word. My heart softened like a wave after a storm. Many think honor is something you receive from others, a medal, a name called on TV, applause in a hall. But I believe true honor is the truth you keep, even if no one names it, even if the system tried to erase it. If you're reading this, you might carry a truth like that. One doubted, denied, or simply overlooked. And if so, I hope you know your value isn't in who sees you, but in you not letting yourself disappear. Once a senior officer new to the base asked me, "Have you ever felt like giving up?" I answered honestly, "I've wanted to disappear, but never to quit." Because I knew if I vanished, someone like me later might also be seen as non-existent. A week ago, I was invited to speak at my old Naval Academy, where I was once misnamed at the oath ceremony. This time, they got it right. They introduced me by rank, by role, and by Operation Starhold. I stepped to the podium, looked at hundreds of young faces, some perhaps destined to be overlooked because they didn't fit the military air mold someone created. I told my story. No embellishment, no omissions, no resentment, just the sequence of events. Then I ended with, "You don't need anyone's permission to be here. Your existence is proof you're ready." The hall went silent for a few seconds, then clapped. But what moved me wasn't the applause. It was the look in a freshman's eyes, a skinny girl with short hair. The look I once had. A quiet question. Am I the exception? And in that moment I saw clearly she knew the answer had changed. I know you reading this final chapter might carry a miswritten name, a stolen achievement, a buried truth. I can't fix everything. But I can leave you this: don't let silence be where your honor is buried. If someone denied you, remember, there are people like me, like my team, like Daniel, choosing to keep the truth alive every day. That afternoon, I tidied my desk. In the sunset's glow, everything was bathed in soft gold. I looked at the shelf again, the metal box, the letter, my mother's words. I didn't cry. I just placed my hand on the desk's edge, closed my eyes, and breathed deeply. For the first time in my life, I felt I didn't need to stand to prove anything anymore. I was standing, and that was enough. Looking back on the journey from a medal with the wrong name to moments I thought were forgotten, I realized honor isn't in loud recognition, but in not letting your truth vanish. This story isn't just mine. It's the story of anyone overlooked, forced to stand backstage, while others were lit up. I share this not to reclaim anything, but to remind us we deserve to be here, no permission needed. And if you even once found yourself in the dark, remember, light doesn't always come from the stage, but can start from within you. Thank you for staying with me to the final chapter. If this story touched you, leave a comment. Tell me your journey. Follow the channel to not miss the next stories, because every voice deserves to be heard, especially those once forced to stay silent.